Welcome to NTD Good Morning.
Here are today's top stories. The FBI raises the reward to $100,000 as new details emerge about the suspect's seen in Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera.
And a funding showdown puts the Department of Homeland Security on the brink of shutdown. Democrats block a spending bill over ICE reforms.
Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem highlighting efforts against drug trafficking in San Diego. She's making a case for Congress to continue funding the department.
2 Pakistanis indicted in Chicago over an alleged $10 million healthcare fraud scheme. They're accused of fake labs, stolen identities, and billing insurers for services that were not performed.
New York is now the 13th state plus the District of Columbia to legalize assisted suicide. We'll discuss what that means with an ethics director here in our studio.
And with the advancement of artificial intelligence, romance scams are on the rise. We're going to take a look at how you can better prepare yourself this Valentine's Day.
This is NTD Good Morning, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here are Stephanie Cox and Carrie Dunst.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Today's Friday, February 13th. You're watching NTD Good Morning. In today's top news, there are new details about the suspect seen in Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera footage. The FBI describes the man as having a height of 5'9" to 5'10", with an average build.
And the FBI has increased the reward now to $100,000 for information that can lead to the recovery of Nancy Guthrie. Here's more on that.
New details from the FBI about the person they're seeking in connection with the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. After using specialized equipment to analyze the scene, the FBI now believes that the individual is approximately 5'9" to 5'10" tall, with an average build, and gives us a better look at the type of backpack they say the suspect was carrying.
The height and the backpack are very good clues. And what the FBI will do is they'll start with the realm of the possible. How many of these backpacks were sold, when they were sold?
Also, a public plea from law enforcement to the community surrounding Nancy Guthrie's home. Check your surveillance cameras. Asking neighbors within a 2-mile radius for any video from January 1st to February 2nd to look for any vehicles or people that look out of place.
This is a targeted kidnapping. That person didn't just show up there that day and wonder, geez, will she be here? Will she be at home? They knew who she was. They knew her home.
Meanwhile, investigators have recovered several items of evidence, including gloves, the Pima County Sheriff's Department said Thursday afternoon.
They're going to check this thing every possible scientific way for anything that can bring them to a clue or a person.
A banner has been placed outside of KVOA, where Nancy's daughter Savannah Guthrie once worked, echoing the words of her children, "Bring her home."
Now a developing story about a shooting at South Carolina State University. The university says 2 people are dead, 1 person wounded. The university says they issued a campus lockdown around 9 p.m. last night after a report of a shooting at a residential complex. University officials have not confirmed the victims' identities or the condition of the person wounded. The university canceled all classes today and said that state law enforcement division is investigating the shooting.
The Department of Homeland Security is almost out of time. Democratic senators blocked a funding bill for it yesterday.
NTD's Daniel Monahan brings us more on that, plus reactions from lawmakers.
All other government agencies have been fully funded through September, but money for DHS got held up after Democrats demanded reforms in its immigration enforcement operations. 52 senators voted to advance a full-year spending bill, not enough to overcome the 60-vote threshold, while 47 senators opposed it. Senator John Fetterman broke ranks with his party to support the measure. Fetterman says shutting DHS down has zero impacts for ICE, which he says already has $75 billion in funding from the Big Beautiful Bill.
So what it will impact is that we'll shut down important parts of DHS, whether that's FEMA, whether that's the Coast Guard.
The deadline to fund DHS is actually tonight, but Congress is off all next week for the President's Day holiday. Many senators left after casting their final votes for the week. GOP leader John Thune vowed to call them back to Washington if Democrats strike a deal with the White House. Thune says Republicans made concessions in the bill, speaking on Fox News.
It was a bipartisan bill, had reforms in it. It had body cameras in it, had de-escalation training in it. It had more oversight of ICE activities in it. These are reforms that the Democrats had requested, agreed to, and then walked away from.
Nearly all DHS workers will remain on the job, but many won't get paid until Congress passes a funding bill.
I don't think it's good politics for anybody, particularly when their message they're sending right now is we're okay with defunding law enforcement, we're okay with defunding the police.
Democrats explain their position.
Funding for ICE and the Department of Homeland Security should not move forward in the absence of dramatic changes that are bold, meaningful, and transformational.
This vote today asked a simple question. Will you rein in ICE's abuses, or will you vote to extend the chaos?
Their demands include stricter use of force standards, clearer identification for DHS officers, judicial warrants, and limits on what they describe as racial profiling. Other agencies that would be affected by a shutdown include the Transportation Security Administration and the Secret Service. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Thank you, Daniel. And as the Department of Homeland Security moves toward a possible shutdown, Secretary Kristi Noem is making a case that its funding must be continued. Noem in San Diego, touting the department's efforts to stop hundreds of thousands of pounds of lethal drugs from entering the U.S. Here's the details.
Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem highlighting what she says the Trump administration has done to make America safe again.
We got everybody?
Noem speaking to the press in a San Diego vault she said contains more than 1.7 billion lethal doses of seized narcotics.
The vault that we've toured today holds 188,218 pounds of seized illicit drugs.
Noem saying under the second Trump administration, fentanyl trafficking alone has dropped by 56%.
But also right here in front of you, just in this bin in front of you, you see enough lethal doses of fentanyl that would kill 10 million Americans.
Noem also says Border Patrol has released 0 illegal immigrants into the U.S. for 9 straight months.
We're concerned about the Department of Homeland Security not being funded. In fact, I think it's the wrong message to send to the world at this point in time.
Democrats are demanding better identification for ICE agents and other changes to immigration enforcement, including the use of judicial warrants.
When you think about it, every other portion of the federal government has been funded except Homeland Security. That's telling the rest of the world the Democrat Party doesn't think that protecting America is safe.
Noem also saying it isn't just drug and immigration enforcement that will be affected.
But only 11% of that bill is ICE. The rest of it is FEMA, which is responsible for disaster response, for protecting our critical infrastructure. Other things that wouldn't be funded is TSA. The security at all of our airports is in jeopardy because they've refused to fund the Department of Homeland Security.
Noem pointing out this comes on the heels of a 43-day government shutdown during which TSA employees weren't paid, and also saying the U.S. Secret Service and the Coast Guard would be impacted.
This department was created recognizing that we are vulnerable to terrorist attacks and that American homeland needs to be funded and focused on keeping us safe within our own borders.
Right now, it looks likely the DHS will shut down by this weekend. With the House and Senate adjourning for recess, lawmakers won't get another chance to revisit the issue for another 10 days.
President Trump is deploying American energy as a geopolitical weapon, warning Iran of traumatic consequences if it refuses a nuclear deal, while rolling back Obama-era greenhouse gas regulations at home.
Meanwhile, in Venezuela, Energy Secretary Chris Wright is working to revive the oil production in a bid to curb the influence of China, Russia, and Iran in the region. NTD's Washington correspondent Mari Otsu brings us more on that.
President Trump's fresh warning for Iran comes as the Pentagon prepares to deploy its second aircraft carrier strike group to the Gulf. That's in addition to the USS Lincoln, which is already standing by there in the Middle East. And when asked about the timeline for U.S.-Iran negotiations, President Trump says that a deal could be reached in the next month. Take a look.
We have to make a deal, otherwise it's going to be very traumatic. Very traumatic. I don't want that to happen, but we have to make a deal. They should have made a deal the first time, and they got Midnight Hammer instead. And this will be very traumatic for Iran.
This comes a day after President Trump met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to talk Iran negotiations, with Israel joining the president's Board of Peace. President Trump says he insisted to Netanyahu that Iran negotiations must continue. Netanyahu, though, says he's skeptical about any deal with Iran and is lobbying the Trump administration to press the Iranian regime to scale back its ballistic missile program and end its support for terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah.
The president believes that the Iranians have already learned who they are dealing with. He believes that the conditions he is creating, combined with the fact that they surely understand that they made a mistake last time by not reaching an agreement, may create the conditions for achieving a good deal.
Meanwhile, President Trump's laser focused on energy this week. He's repealing the 2009 legal finding that claimed carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases endanger public health, touting it as the largest deregulatory action in American history.
We are officially terminating the so-called endangerment finding. This action will save American consumers trillions of dollars and will lower the average cost of a new vehicle by close to $3,000.
And as he directs the Pentagon to power military operations with domestic coal, President Trump says communist Cuba is in, quote, big trouble. That's as Mexico sends humanitarian aid to Cuba, which is crippled by severe oil shortages. The Trump administration last month ousted Maduro, cut off Venezuela's subsidized oil lifeline to Cuba, and threatened tariffs on any nation supplying oil to the island. President Trump now celebrates the relationship between Venezuela and the U.S. as Energy Secretary Chris Wright negotiates oil revival deals there, touting how the administration is strategically using its energy policy to dismantle anti-Western regimes.
One of the problems in Venezuela, as you point out, is the huge presence of China, of Russia, of Iran. Hezbollah and Hamas North American headquarters are here in Venezuela. We want it to be open to less corrupt, honest American, Western American allies for business. We need to get our adversaries, particularly their nefarious activities, out of our hemisphere. The influence of China and Russia and Iran that has been very large in Venezuela will become very small.
With some of the world's largest oil reserves, Venezuela supplied heavily discounted crude to the Chinese regime that helped Beijing meet its energy needs while allowing Caracas to bypass U.S. sanctions. Energy Secretary Wright says that era is coming to an end, instead pushing for transparent market rate deals that will benefit the Venezuelan people and the Western Hemisphere. Reporting from the White House, Mariotsu, NTD News.
Thank you, Mari. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in Germany for the Munich Security Conference.
Rubio telling reporters he expects to speak with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy.
Do you expect to meet with President Zelenskyy when you're there?
I think so. I think he's going to be there, and there's a chance to see him. I believe it's on my schedule. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm sure we will.
NATO member nations have announced a new financial support package to buy American military hardware for Ukraine. Allies pledged to continue supplying anti-aircraft weapons and to help Ukraine produce a dome project to counter Russia's drone attacks.
After his stop in Munich, Rubio is scheduled to travel to Slovakia and then to Hungary, where he'll meet with government officials to discuss cooperation with the U.S.
The CIA is now openly trying to recruit Chinese military officers as informants. This comes just weeks after Beijing purged its top generals. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
The CIA publishing a new video for members of the Chinese military, seeking to turn them into informants. That's as the Chinese Communist Party has been removing dozens of its top military officers and placing them under investigation for over the past few months. Just weeks ago, 2 top commanders were removed, even including Xi Jinping's second-in-command. Look, if you're an officer in China right now, it may not have the most job security, and the CIA appears to be capitalizing on this with its new video showing a disillusioned mid-level Chinese officer and how he's fed up with the party.
但现在这些谎言壁垒逐渐坍塌，最后留下给我们的就是收拾残局。任何有领导能力的人必定遭受忌惮，被无情绞杀。我不能让这些狂人来塑造我女儿未来的世界。
The video leaves a secure contact number to get in touch with the CIA. It's part of the agency's broader effort that started last May of sending videos into mainland China with instructions on how to securely contact U.S. intelligence.
The way to counter China is to go on offense. A lot of the people in China are not happy with what's happening. And they can be, great sources of intelligence for us. We'll have more people inside, behind China's Great Wall.
Meanwhile, the Pentagon is teaming up with the Department of Agriculture to crack down on Chinese companies purchasing U.S. farmland unusually close to sensitive military sites.
Shortly after 9/11, U.S. forces in Afghanistan uncovered al-Qaeda training manuals that specifically targeted America's agriculture.
China alone owns 265,000 acres of American agricultural land.
On top of concerns of espionage, officials say it's also about protecting the food supply. Under the new agreement, the Pentagon will coordinate with the USDA scientists to identify and stop these threats. They say adversaries don't just target the battlefields, they target systems that feed and sustain the country. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Thank you, Jack. And 2 Pakistanis are indicted in Chicago over an alleged $10 million healthcare fraud scheme, accused of fake labs, stolen identities, and billing insurers for services never performed. We've got that. And
New York is now the 13th state, plus the District of Columbia, to legalize assisted suicide. We're going to discuss what that means with an ethics director here in our studio. Right, well, stay with us. We'll be right back.
welcome back. Federal prosecutors in Chicago have indicted 2 foreign nationals in a $10 million health care fraud scheme.
Authorities say the pair used fake labs and medical equipment companies, and they submitted false Medicare and private insurance claims for services that were actually never provided.
So the defendants are originally from Pakistan, and they allegedly used personal and provider information without consent to support the fraudulent claims. One is also accused of laundering the scheme's proceeds and sending the money overseas.
3 co-conspirators have already pleaded guilty. Officials say the fraud took money intended for seniors and disabled Americans. They vow to continue cracking down on healthcare fraud. Court dates have not yet been set.
A transnational gang is facing jail time for allegedly bribing U.S. Navy service members.
Homeland Security says the Chinese nationals arranged phony marriages with military members, and that would get them access to cards and immigration benefits. NTD's David Lamb has more on that.
A scheme involving marriage fraud, conspiracy, bribery, and national security. Homeland Security says 11 people were charged in Florida as part of an operation targeting a Chinese transnational criminal group. The gang allegedly recruited U.S. military members to marry Chinese citizens for immigration benefits and military base access cards. The fraudulent marriages took place around the country, including in Jacksonville, Florida, as well as in New York, Connecticut, and Nevada. According to the Justice Department, to create the illusion of a real marriage, the suspects took photos of the couples to create evidence that could be presented to immigration authorities to suggest that they were in loving, committed relationships. Quote, in reality, the conspirators had agreed to a payment plan whereby the U.S. citizen's spouse would receive a cash payment upfront for marrying the Chinese national, a second payment when legal immigration status was obtained, and a final payment after the divorce. Homeland Security says 5 individuals have already been arrested and that authorities are pursuing the 6 remaining suspects. 5 people are charged with marriage fraud conspiracy between March 2024 and February 2025. Among them, several are charged with additional counts of bribery conspiracy, facing a maximum of 5 years in prison for each guilty conviction. 4 former U.S. Navy service members are awaiting sentencing hearings after pleading guilty for their involvement. Last February, Navy reservist Raymond Zumba allegedly brought 3 suspects to a naval air station after hours to receive ID cards for an under-the-table payment. They were arrested the following day. David Lamb, NTD News.
And the ICE surge in Minnesota is coming to an end. Border Czar Tom Homan calling the operation a great success with 4,000 arrests and over 3,000 missing unaccompanied children found.
As well as a greater cooperation now with state and local officials. NTD correspondent Jason Blair brings us more.
The Twin Cities, Minnesota in general, are and will continue to be much safer for the communities here because of what we have accomplished.
Border Czar Tom Homan announces the end of ICE Operation Metro Surge in Minnesota
after a 10-week run.
As a result of this surge operation, we have greatly reduced the number of targets for enforcement action, and many criminal aliens have been arrested and taken off the streets.
Homan says some notable reasons the surge is ending is county jails are now notifying ICE when an illegal immigrant is being released, which is normal protocol in many other states.
We now have the ability to arrest criminal aliens in the safety and security of jails throughout the state,
as well as more help from state and local law enforcement when unlawful agitators act out against ICE agents making arrests and protesters who cross the line.
I have also received commitments from state and local law enforcement that they will respond if federal law enforcement is being impeded or assaulted.
Homan says the police have been following through on these commitments and making a noticeable difference.
I'm also pleased to report that we're seeing a notable decrease on unlawful agitator activity here in Minneapolis and overall throughout the state.
The drawdown also comes after 2 fatal DHS-involved shootings happened in the state last month, and some calling on agents to take a less aggressive approach in their operations. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz responded to Homan's announcement, saying, "The long road to recovery starts now. The impact on our economy, our schools, and our people's lives won't be reversed overnight." And Homan says along with over 4,000 illegal immigrants being arrested, 3,364 unaccompanied children who went missing after crossing the border have been located in the state.
That's because of the leadership of President Trump, these children were located.
The border czar says a significant drawdown of agents has already been underway this week and will continue into next week. Then command will go back to the local field office and ICE will operate as it normally does before the surge happened. However, extra personnel investigating fraud and unlawful agitator activity will remain, as well as a small footprint to make sure agitator activity continues to decline and local law enforcement continue to help.
I cannot remove law enforcement personnel while violence poses serious risk to our officers. I will not leave my officers in that position.
Tom Homan says he'll remain in the state a little longer to oversee the drawdown. Jason Blair, NTD News.
And last week, New York Governor Kathy Hochul signed a bill into law allowing for medical aid in dying, or MAID, by way of an oral liquid prescription.
Now, the law starts off quite structured and restrictive. The patient must be terminally ill with only 6 months to live, confirmed independently by 2 doctors. The patient must also have deemed to have the decision-making capacity to understand what they're doing. And then there's a 5-day waiting period from when the medication can be fulfilled upon the prescription being requested. The patient also must be able to self-administer the oral prescription. Also, religious care facilities may opt out from participation.
The New York law is said to follow the model set in Oregon and places New York among a dozen states, plus the District of Columbia, now allowing for medical aid in dying.
And joining us in studio now to discuss is Amanda Achtman. She's an ethics director with Canadian Physicians for Life.
So good to have you with us this morning, Amanda. Really looking forward to this discussion. Let's start with the aspect just of the term itself, medical aid in dying. It's actually shifted recently from assisted suicide, the term most people know. Why is that?
In Canada, medical aid in dying, or MAID, became legalized in 2016 and encompassed both assisted suicide and euthanasia. The distinction being euthanasia is where the doctor or nurse directly administers the lethal injection to the patient, whereas assisted suicide is where the patient has to administer him or herself. And so in the United States, as was mentioned, only assisted suicide is legal. In Canada, there's the option for either. And each year, since it has been legal, there have been a handful of people who have opted for the self-administration, but the vast majority opt instead to have the doctor or nurse do it. And in the last year for which we have data, 2024, all 16,499 Canadians opted for that direct euthanasia under the term of MAID.
Now, it seems as if it's been 10 years now in Canada. This law in New York, I just read it and I just got the highlights, but it seems, very specific, very structured. What has been the experience with Canada as it relates to, the specificity of the requirements to allow it?
It's true that initially euthanasia in Canada too had this narrow criteria. There was a need for death to be deemed reasonably foreseeable. So whether that's the term or whether it's a 6-month prognosis, which we know doctors often do get wrong, there was this purported narrow criteria. However, once legalized, euthanasia or assisted suicide cannot remain limited, but must be expanded on the grounds of equality. Because if this is a reasonable and compassionate means to alleviate suffering, then how can you not extend it to people who may suffer just as much, if not more, but not have a terminal illness? And so that is why the eligibility criteria under the grounds of equality necessarily has been expanded in Canada to people with disabilities and chronic illness. And the same will happen if the logic is followed to its conclusion that death is the solution to suffering.
Yeah, this sounds like quite a slippery slope. I know that you advocate against medical aid in dying, and I can see this could be one reason why. If you would like to dig into if there are any other reasons as well, or further explain this.
Quite simply, I believe that everybody deserves suicide prevention rather than suicide assistance. There's nothing that could happen to any one of us that should mean that we are met with a look that says, maybe you're better off dead. There is always more that we can do in terms of love. And euthanasia-assisted suicide represents a failure to love. We need to always insist that people deserve more and people deserve better. If we say that there's a threshold of illness or disability or suffering that we can't meet and for whom there's nothing we can do, what does that say to the people with the same condition who don't want it? And that's what shows you that this is not just about autonomy or freedom, but it's about creating criteria that gives a social valuation and makes a judgment on the value of life that has a ripple effect for everyone who fits that criteria, whether they opt for it or not.
And to play the devil's advocate or to understand those who are in favor of it, they say that this is showing compassion for people who are suffering. And as Steph mentioned, you can see how the definition then becomes somewhat of a slippery slope. So what would you say to somebody who, even in just the term, it sounds very compassionate, but clearly, you're introducing reasons why people should maybe think a bit more broadly about the topic and not just see that one moment of suffering?
It's important to think clearly about what's at stake and what's involved. Euthanasia and assisted suicide is the direct ending of a patient's life prematurely. And that is not compassion. That is not a communion in suffering between people who love. It is so inadequate to the suffering and dying person to be, again, met with this discarding and dismissing posture. Another point I'll make is that we tend to focus so much on the individual. As a millennial, I find that the main way that this issue is affecting my friends is that they're losing their grandparents this way. I recently interviewed a friend who lost both of his grandmothers within 2 months of each other. They both opted for MAID. This has gone from exceptional to routine to becoming the ideal way to die. And so we have to decide, is this the way to die? Or do we have something better to propose? We have to have something better to propose than death. I think that the request for it betrays a disappointment, not so much as the desire to die, and people deserve so much more. This is creating complex grief, intergenerational trauma, and I hear stories literally every day from people who are affected. So that's why I personally am dedicating my life to this topic.
Can you share a little bit more about what you've learned and experienced north of the border? Because as we were saying, the U.S. starting to follow Canada's lead. Now we have 13 states and the District of Columbia, with the exception of Montana, which is a fiercely liberty-focused conservative state. We do see the trend here in the U.S. more among the more liberal states.
This entire cultural conversation that would purport to offer death as a solution actually makes all of us more precarious, because any of us could get to this situation where we are vulnerable in the particular ways that would render us eligible. In fact, I am more personally concerned about fitting the government's criteria that tells me I'm eligible for a state-sponsored suicide than I am of any terminal diagnosis. That is the toll that it has. And this is what is creating an anxious generation. We might want to attribute it to smartphones or to social media, but think about the precariousness that ensues among the young when, as you age, as you suffer, you opt out of life. This is extremely threatening, not only among the people who opt for it, but even the conversation that suicide becomes normalized or acceptable. That's devastating. We have so many mental health crises. We have so much addiction. And I think I, as a young person, and my generation is looking out and wondering, what is on offer? It has to be better than death.
And Amanda, as we start to finish up, as you said, you've dedicated your life to this issue, seeing that this represents not just the issue itself, but maybe something broader. Could you comment to that as we begin to finish up?
Absolutely. Canada does do a survey, as many of the US states do, on the main kinds of suffering leading people to request euthanasia. And pain and suffering, and even fear of pain, is not in the top 3. The number one kind of suffering by people's own admission leading them to request euthanasia in Canada is an inability to engage in meaningful life activities. This indicates to us, by people's own admission, that euthanasia is not fundamentally a medical crisis, but an existential one. And that's why I'm so interested in this conversation, in engaging Canadians every single day about suffering, death, meaning, and hope, in working with medical professionals who want to practice in the Hippocratic tradition and to actually have a relationship of trust in that doctor-patient relationship. So I see it as a window to humanizing the culture to tackle this issue, because when else do we have so much of our humanity at stake in a question that really concerns all of us, because we will all suffer certain things and we will all die, but that doesn't threaten our lives. Meaning is to be found even in great suffering, and sometimes those bedside moments, sometimes that bedside reconciliation that happens between family members is the most important thing of a person's life or a person's relationship. So we would not want to miss that or cut that short.
Amanda Ackman, such a powerful message and such an important discussion. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And up ahead, Instagram's top executive took the witness stand in Los Angeles in a closely watched trial as tech giants are accused of creating harmful and addictive digital products. Ahead. Welcome back. The Environmental Protection Agency says it's ended a credit program that incentivized automakers to include automatic start-stop systems in cars.
The system was initially intended to reduce emissions, which EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin described as, quote, universally hated.
Start-stop systems automatically shut down the vehicle's engine when the car is stopped, like a red light, then automatically restarts the engine when the driver takes their foot off the brake pedal.
Around 60% of vehicles have this feature now, and according to the Society of Automotive Engineers, this can provide drivers anywhere from 7 to 26% in fuel economy savings.
The decision to eliminate the credit is a result of Zeldin signing a final rule yesterday that ended the Obama-era 2009 greenhouse gas endangerment finding.
It regulated greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles and provided the legal foundation for many climate regulations.
U.S. existing home sales tumbling to the lowest level in more than 2 years in January as falling inventory raises house prices. Joining us for Insight is house market analyst Jeff Ostrowski from Bankrate. Good to have you with us this morning, Jeff. Let's start with what this latest report means for home prices.
Okay, great. Thank you.
What do you think it means for home prices to start with?
Well, the home prices keep going up, which is really fascinating. So that there's been this thought that there's an affordability squeeze, that buyers just can't figure out how to buy in this market. But home prices keep going up, and that pace of appreciation has slowed. So during the pandemic, they were shooting up. Now home prices are just going up gradually. But yes, it seems like home prices are going to either keep going up slightly, flatten out a bit, I should add that there are definitely regional differences. So Florida, Texas, Arizona have seen prices falling. And then markets in the Northeast and the Midwest are seeing prices still increasing pretty strongly.
And what's driving this kind of sluggishness in the housing market?
Well, it's a variety of factors. So one thing is that because prices are at record highs, they've really stretched the bounds of affordability. A lot of first-time buyers just can't afford a house right now, and so they're just not even trying. They're renting. A lot of young adults are on the sidelines of the housing market. So the median age of first-time buyers is up to 40. So a lot of people in their 30s are just remaining as renters. And then the other thing is the mortgage lock-in effect. So during the pandemic, mortgage rates plunged to 3%. Homeowners refinanced, they locked in those super low mortgage rates. And most Americans who own homes are, maybe they would be ready to move under normal circumstances, but they're looking at that 3% mortgage rate that they've got, and they're looking at mortgage rates today over 6%, and they're saying, I don't want to move, I'm just going to stay here for the foreseeable future.
And what's your advice then, if you mentioned that the housing market does differ across the country, for folks who may be looking to make the most of what they've got, for those renters who are still out there and perhaps ready to buy?
If you're looking in one of those formerly hot Sunbelt markets of Florida, Texas, Arizona, you really have a lot of leverage. You have some power in the market, which was not the case 3 and 4 years ago. The bidding wars are gone. That situation where as soon as a house came on the market, you had to put in an offer. That's not the case anymore. So in those slowing markets, you actually have some time to look at places, to some room to bargain. You don't have to waive inspections. So it's definitely a better time in those markets. But if you're looking in New York or Chicago or even Buffalo, Pittsburgh, those markets are still seeing prices go up. And so it's the advice really kind of depends on what part of the country you're shopping for a home in.
And of course, we're expecting some changes in leadership at the Fed. Do you think that's going to impact mortgage rates at all?
Probably not. So the Federal Reserve does not directly dictate mortgage rates. The Fed does set the tone overall for mortgage rates, but it's not dictating mortgage rates. And I think the best illustration of that came a little over a year ago when the Fed actually cut rates by a point and mortgage rates went up by a full point. So the mortgage market zigged while the Fed was zagging. And it seems like we're in that situation where Fed policy isn't really driving mortgage rates. So it's hard to see that a new Fed chairman is going to really directly affect mortgage rates.
So just with our last 30 seconds, what do you think will happen with mortgage rates, and what's your advice for people overall who may be ready right now to buy or wanting to buy?
So the consensus is mortgage rates are going to stay at this level, at just above 6%. So according to Bankrate's latest National Weekly Survey of Lenders, mortgage rates are at their lowest level since September of 2022. So they're definitely down a bit, 6.16% according to our survey. So they're unlikely to go much lower than this. And I would say if you're a buyer, don't focus too much on mortgage rates. Like don't try to time the mortgage market. I would base it on your readiness and your willingness to buy. If you're financially prepared, if you're going to be in this home for a few years, I would say focus on that rather than on what the mortgage rate is.
Great to have your insights this morning. Thank you so much for joining us, Jeff Ostrowski.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And Instagram's top executive took the witness stand in Los Angeles this week in a closely watched trial. This as Google and Meta face a lawsuit in LA from 1,600 plaintiffs. They're accusing the tech giants of creating digital products that are designed to be addictive, resulting in harm. Joining us now to discuss the case against Meta and Google in LA is Daniel Cochran. He's a senior research associate with the Heritage Foundation. Daniel, thanks for joining this morning. Can you elaborate on some of the alleged harms that the plaintiffs are saying are as a result of Meta and YouTube, specifically to this case?
Yeah, it's great to be with you. This case opens the door to parents whose kids have been victimized by social media, and the harm stem from product features that pull them into destructive relationships online, algorithms that are highly addictive to children in particular. You know, in a subsequent case, there were internal documents where Meta's own employees referred to their activities as drug pushers. They referred to their own products as essentially digital narcotics. And there's a variety of ways that these products are harmful. And in addition to being highly addictive, they also have, unfortunately, opened the door to teen suicide, self-harm, declining mental health. TikTok in particular is one of the worst offenders here. TikTok's For You feed repeatedly has recommended videos to young people, encouraging them to take their own lives. In fact, that's several of the plaintiffs are alleging, the families of the plaintiffs are alleging that TikTok, in curating its videos to recommend self-harm, is violating the law. And so this is the first time that these companies are being held accountable. And for the sake of kids that are vulnerable and often without recourse, this really is an important moment.
And as you just mentioned, TikTok having settled, we just saw this previous story about Snapchat. They've also settled in this case. So is there any foreshadowing with what Snapchat and TikTok have agreed to that you see potentially Meta and Google going along with in regards to this case?
Well, it's notable that Meta and YouTube are sticking it out. And I think that's really risky because going to trial in a case like this, if the jury finds essentially that they're liable, this is going to have ramifications far beyond these plaintiffs. Although this is a very big case, you mentioned 1,600 plaintiffs, because ultimately, if you can sue these companies in state court, this is in the state of California, state court for defective products, which is essentially what the social media companies are. I mean, they're defective products that are designed to ensnare children. Then that means that companies could face ruin if they release products to vulnerable populations like kids without implementing reasonable safeguards. So the hope here is both justice for these families, that needs to absolutely happen, but long term, if you open the courthouse doors to this kind of litigation and this trial succeeds, it could have a much more fundamental effect on how social media platforms are designed and deployed going forward. And I think kids would greatly benefit from that outcome.
And Daniel, historically, these tech platforms were shielded from liability under something called Section 230. Can you outline what that is and how it's been used in the past and why, in this case, that might be coming to an end?
Yeah, so Section 230 basically does two things. It says, number one, as an interactive computer service, so a platform, you're not liable for the content posted by your users. It also says if you take good faith measures to block obscenity, then you're also not liable for doing that. And of course, the reason for that is Congress, in the early days of 230, that was 1996 when the bill was originally passed, or the law was originally enacted, they wanted to make sure that the internet remained a free and open space while also fighting the proliferation of pornography. We've seen now the internet become a cesspool, and a lot of these platforms have become a cesspool with AI-generated pornography, child sexual abuse material, all kinds of erotica. And the courts, particularly the Third Circuit, ruled in a case brought by the parents of Megan Garcia, a young girl who took her own life after watching a self-asphyxiation video recommended to her by TikTok's algorithm. TikTok raised, of course, the 230 claim. The court dismissed it and said, look, you know, insofar as the company is recommending content, you can't claim immunity from liability because they're in those cases, they're acting essentially like a publisher. So the Third Circuit's already limited TikTok. Other circuits, and this is again in the federal court, they have different interpretations as to what 230 covers. But what's really important here in California with these 1,600 plaintiffs is that the courts have said, look, 230 maybe it covers content, but it certainly does not cover defective design. So the lawsuit is alleging, insofar as you create an algorithm that is recommending content, addicting kids, creating these harms, you're still liable regardless of 230. So that's a really notable feature of this case.
And Daniel, we just have about 30 seconds left. Addiction is a big departure from what had been claimed in the past. That historically was for really drugs and alcohol. But now we see online pornography, gaming, these digital services. Australia has banned social media. To my knowledge, they've not banned gaming. Do you see other countries, particularly the U.S., doing something stronger to follow Australia's lead?
Well, we really need to, and we're already doing that at the state level. For example, bell-to-bell bans on smartphone use. You're seeing that have really positive effects. A lot of folks in Gen Z, the Gen Z generation, they're doing it on their own. They're putting away their phones. But yes, it's important to recognize that the effects of the brain that social media has on the brain is similar to drugs. So that response, the dopamine response that social media apps elicit, it's very similar to if you're taking hard drugs, and that's by design. And by the way, these companies know that. I referred to the internal conversation as at Instagram, where those employees were referring to themselves as pushers. They understand exactly what they're doing, and it's time for them to be held accountable.
Yeah, certainly a shocking story. We'll be watching this case closely. Thanks for joining, Daniel Cochran.
Thanks.
And Portugal's parliament is advancing a bill to restrict children's access to social media.
The measure is aimed at protecting young people from harmful online content.
The bill aims to forbid any kind of access to social media platforms for children up to 13 years of age and would limit access for teenagers under 16 years. Parents would use a national digital system to grant permission to use social media. Under the rules, tech providers would be required to implement age verification checks.
It's one of the first concrete legislative moves in Europe to impose such a restriction on social media. The bill still needs further debate before it will become law. And up ahead, as artificial intelligence advances, romance scams are on the rise. We're going to take a look at how you can better prepare yourself this Valentine's Day.
Welcome back. While Valentine's Day puts dating on the minds of many singles out there, scam predators are looking to prey on singles with advanced scams.
Yeah, not so great, right? NTD's Sean Marshall has the details on how fraudsters are actually getting away with it and the scale of it as well. Take a look.
The usual Valentine's warnings are going out again in the state of New York and across the United States. Each year, traditional romance and catfish scams evolve into more and more sophisticated artificial intelligence operations.
So probably the first scam that people are falling victim to as far as romance scams is the pig butchering scam. Now this scam is named for the fact that criminals view the victim as a pig that they're fattening up to slaughter. So it works with criminals using AI to gather information about the victim.
A scammer might create an entirely fake crypto website that even allows you to withdraw a little bit of money in order to get you to invest more into the fake website.
Now, once the victim purchases Bitcoin, then the criminal is easily able to walk away from the situation. The victim is lost, has a loss of funds, and the criminal is not able to be traced easily, because Bitcoin, as we all know, as electronic currency, is hard to detect.
There's always the possibility of someone sending a video saying that they're Burton Kelso and they've got a great new crypto website that you should invest into.
Now, criminals are using AI to disguise themselves, because it used to be that people would go to video chat to prove that the person that they were talking to was realistic. But with AI, it's hard to tell that you are talking to an AI deepfake as opposed to a real person.
According to the Federal Trade Commission, in the first 3 quarters of 2025, New Yorkers reported over $42 million in losses in connection with romance scams.
Now, finally, the another scary AI romance scam is the sextortion scam. And this occurs when criminals blackmail their victims with sexually explicit photos that they gain from either online photos of the person on social media or dating sites, or just with personal interaction through online video chat. Now, the way this sextortion scam works in 2026 is that criminals will, again, find a victim to develop a relationship with, and it will turn into an event where the criminal will invite the victim to share a photo of themselves, and once that's done, AI software can then undress the victim, and then the criminal can come back and extort the person by threatening to release the sensitive photographs on the internet in exchange for either money in Bitcoin or just with money in hard currency.
Aside from simply meeting up with the possible fraudster somewhere in real life, there are a couple ways to defend yourself from these newer advanced AI scams.
What you need to do in order to make the person prove that they are showing their legitimate self on video is to have the person either wave their hand in front of their face or have them turn to a hard right or hard left, which will disrupt the AI deep fake voice, or not voice, but the AI deep fake video that is occurring during the chat. And that will be a clear sign that it is a deep fake video, and you can prevent yourself from being scammed.
Sean Marshall, NTD News.
Well, I guess the sign of the times. That's a great report from Sean. Very timely, very important. You know, the FTC is saying it costs Americans about $1 billion a year, and it's about a $4 billion problem globally. Yeah. So maybe we can spin this and shift to something more positive related to Valentine's Day, right?
It does seem like a pretty bad trend, but at the same time, I think it is a symptom of something bigger and broader, people feeling more isolated, disconnected from one another. There are so many ways to do that. And sure, Valentine's Day is a great reason to just reach out to anyone, you know, that you know, a friend or a family member, and connect. Have a nice time, have a coffee, go play some board games or something, you know. There's lots of things you can do with the people around you.
Do it old school, right?
Yeah, just get face-to-face with the people you know and love. All right, next up, dozens of rescued dogs and cats swapped kennels for dates with pet lovers yesterday at an animal shelter in Manila. Well, that sounds very sweet.
Yeah, that's a good way to shift it to the positive. Now, the Philippine capital launched a Valentine's Day fur date event pairing sheltered animals with pet lovers, hoping to offer them new homes.
The native dogs, a lot of people see them on the streets in very bad condition, and there is a myth that if it's an Aspin and it's a rescued dog, that it's a damaged animal that can be ferocious, that cannot be adopted. So we want to smash that myth. We want to tell people that sheltered dogs are not damaged goods. They're actually the best type of pets that you can get, and they need to be given a second chance, because those that are given second chances really make the best of a lifetime friend.
Handlers from Philippine Animal Welfare Society arranged short meet and greet dates, allowing visitors to spend one-on-one time with the animals.
And the Valentine's Day program was designed to help people connect with animals beyond the usual shelter walkthrough.
Among the participants was Tali, a pup rescued in 2021 with a wire collar painfully embedded around her neck. Despite her trauma, she eagerly bounded toward visitors with treats.
Oh, and for the shelter, the dates may last only minutes, but for the animals, organizers hope they lead to a lifetime match. Looks like a great way to have a speed dating session where you get to meet lots of different potential suitors for your home. You know, you meet the cat, and then you go and you meet the next one.
Do some good by perhaps adopting an animal that does need a home.
Oh, it's a beautiful thing, right?
Yes. All right.
Well, look, we do have to wrap up the show now. We're wishing you a very wonderful Valentine's Day weekend. But if you have any feedback on the show or there's a story you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at goodmorning@ntd.com. We'd love your feedback.
And of course, round-the-clock original news coverage. You can always watch us live at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. I'm Stephanie Cox.
I'm Carrie Dunst. Have a great weekend.